but it contains the distillation of some of the wisdoms which Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi left behind for us. Many of these are expanded in his larger works, particularly the famous Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences. But this is an abbreviated text which he produced towards the end of his life, and it contains the distillations of his advice. So it's very, very concise, and it's very easy to implement and put into practice. One of the things which he includes in this book is a dialogue which took place between two scholars. And it contains a series of pieces of advice, but the crux of all of this is how do we implement the Qur'an in our daily lives? How do we turn Qur'an from words into action? How do we apply it in our lives? This is the important thing which Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi was at pains to show people and to emphasize to people, that the Qur'an is not just for reading, but it is for implementation. So he mentions a conversation which took place between two great scholars, Hatim Al-Asam and Shaqiq Al-Balkhi. Shaqiq Al-Balkhi is the teacher, and Hatim Al-Asam is the student. And the teacher turns to his student and he says, "You have kept company with me for 30 years." So this is how they used to study in those days. The teacher is accompanied by the student for 30 years. It's not just a year or two, 30 years of service. To live with them, to sit with them, to observe them, to listen to them, to absorb all the knowledge and the manners and the attributes of their teacher so that they become a copy of them. This is how the companions learned from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not from books, but by walking with him, observing him, sitting with him. So he said, "You have kept company with me for 30 years. What have you got out of that? What have you got from these 30 years of companionship?" So the student, Hatim Al-Asam, I say the student, but he is a sheikh. For us, he is a sheikh. He's a student of this teacher. He replied, "I got 8 useful lessons by way of knowledge, and they are enough for me. For I hope my deliverance and salvation, for my deliverance and salvation because of them." So he believes that through 8 lessons he obtained from 30 years of companionship from the teacher, he said, "This will suffice for my deliverance on the Day of Judgment." So the teacher says, Shaqiq said, "What are they?" And Hatim Al-Asam replies. For the barakah, I will recite some of this in Arabic. He says, "Al-fa'idatul ula." He says, the first benefit that I got from your companionship. He says, "Anni nadartu ila al-khalq, fara'aytu li kulli minhum محبوبا ومعشوقا يحبه ويعشقه وبعض ذلك المحبوب يصاحبه إلى مرض الموت وبعضه إلى شفير القبر ثم يرجع كله ويتركه فريدا وحيدا ولا يدخل معه في قبره منهم أحد فتفكرت وقلت أفضل محبوب المرء ما يدخل في قبره ويؤانسه فيه فما وجدت غير الأعمال الصالحة فأخذتها محبوبا لي لتكون سراجا لي في قبري وتؤانسني فيه ولا تتركني فريدا." He said, the first thing that I observed was that mankind, every one of them had an object of love and infatuation. And some of those things which were loved accompanied them up to the moment of sickness. And some of them even up to the moment of reaching the edge of the grave. So he means by this that some of the pleasures of the dunya were there for the person to enjoy until they became sick. And once they were sick, they were no longer able to enjoy the pleasures of the dunya which they had loved. And he said there were even some pleasures, some companions, some things, objects of love, which accompanied them up to the side of the grave. These are the family members. So you leave your pursuits and your pastimes. When you lose your health, then your job, your hobbies, maybe your friends, they all begin to forsake you. And then the house has to be left behind. These are all the things that people love. The wealth has to be left. And the family, they come with you. They are the last ones who are with you. But even they will leave you at the graveside. So he said, even at the graveside, some of them left them there. So I pondered and I said, the best of what one can love is what will enter one's grave and be a friend to one in the grave. The best that you can love is the thing that will be your friend in the grave. And I found it to be nothing but good deeds. So I took them as the object of my love. I took good deeds to be the object of my love, knowing that they would be my companions in the grave, when everything else would leave me. To be a light for me in my grave, to be a friend to me in it, and not leave me all alone. Said all the other objects of love, they would not come with me into the grave. And they would not take away the darkness of the grave. And they would not take away the loneliness of the grave. But only the good deeds which you have done, they will be there in your grave. They will be your companion and they will be your light. So he said, I realized that this was what was worth loving. الفائدة الثانية أني رأيت الخلق يقتدون بأهوائهم ويبادرون إلى مرادات أنفسهم فتأملت قوله تعالى وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى وتيقنت أن القرآن حق صادق فبادرت إلى خلاف نفسي وتشمرت لمجاهدتها ومنعها عن هواها حتى ارتضت لطاعة الله سبحانه وتعالى وانقادت. He said the second useful lesson that I learned is that I saw mankind being guided by their pleasures and hurrying to what their egos desire. So I meditated on his saying, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. As for the one who feared the station of his Lord, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ, and he kept the soul back from vain pleasure, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَىٰ, the garden is his abode. And I was certain that the Qur'an is genuine truth, so I hurried to what my ego was opposed to. So he said he saw the dunya pursuing the desires of the nafs. But he contemplated that Allah Ta'ala said that the one who resists the desires of the nafs will go to Jannah. So he goes in the opposite direction to the dunya. He said, then I made myself busy with opposing the desires of the nafs and the desire of the ego. And I set to work combating it and restraining it from its pleasures until it was satisfied with obedience to Allah, the glorified and exalted, and it gave up. So he tamed the nafs. He said until the nafs was satisfied with obedience to Allah Ta'ala rather than distracting him from the obedience to Allah Ta'ala, he said the nafs became satisfied with obedience to Allah Ta'ala and gave up from distracting him. He said the third useful lesson that he learnt is that I saw every individual in mankind exerting himself in accumulating the ephemeral things of this world. Ephemeral meaning things which are here today and gone tomorrow. Intangible, insubstantial. Then clutching at them, laying hold on them. And I meditated on his saying. He meditated the verse of the Qur'an, مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَذُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. That what is with you will perish, and with what is with Allah will remain. مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَذُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. He said, so I sacrificed the gains I got from the world to God the exalted, and I distributed them amongst the poor. So all of the things of the dunya which he had accumulated, he realized that this was not going to stay. This was not going to last. And what was with Allah would last. So he distributed his wealth amongst the poor so that he would convert the wealth of this world into deeds in the akhirah. So that they would be converted into action, something that would be with Allah Ta'ala as an investment for him. So that they might become a treasure for me with God the Exalted. فَبَذَلْتُ مَحْصُولِي مِنَ الدُّنْيَا لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَفَرَّقْتُهُ بَيْنَ الْمَسَاكِينَ لِيَكُونَ زُخْرًا لِي إِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. Zukhran meaning that it would be a treasure for him in the presence of Allah Ta'ala when he reaches Allah, when he answers to Allah Ta'ala. He said the fourth lesson is that I saw some of mankind believe that their nobility and standing, meaning how people perceive them, to be in the size of their nations and tribes. So they were conceited because of them. Others had the opinion that it lay in the wealth of their possessions and the numerousness of sons, so they were proud of them. So people were concerned with the way that they were perceived by people. And that this would be because of the multitudinous nature of their nations, that they would have power over many countries and populations, and they would have empires. And others thought that it was because of their great wealth, their possessions, or the numerousness of their sons. So all of these things they took pride in, their power, their wealth, their children. And he said, some reckon nobility and standing lay in forcibly acquiring the property of men, in tyrannizing them and spilling their blood. So it comes to the point that people become so obsessed with these signs of power that they use force and oppression to acquire them. To acquire land and wealth, they are prepared to spill blood and to seize what does not belong to them. And a group held that it consisted in wasting money, spending it lavishly and squandering it. So he said some people, they think that to be wealthy means having so much money that they can afford to waste it. Squandering, israf. That they don't need to count. They don't need to say, is this good value? Is it worth it? They say, I have so much, there's no danger of it finishing. I can squander it on whatever I will. And so he said, that I reflected on the saying of Allah Ta'ala, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the one who is greatest in piety. The noblest of you in the view of God is the most God conscious. So he said, I chose taqwa. فَاخْتَرْتُ التَّقْوَى. I chose the taqwa, path of taqwa, believing the Qur'an to be truth, and that the opinion of the others, وَظَنَّهُمْ وَحُسْبَانَهُمْ كُلَّهَا بَاطِلٌ زَائِلٌ. Dhann means supposition. The Qur'an talks about dhann and ilm. Ilm is certain knowledge, whereas dhann is supposition. So he said, I understood that the Qur'an is haqqun sadiqun. Haqq is the highest level of truth. Haqqun sadiqun. The truth in its highest form. وَظَنَّهُمْ, and their supposition, وَحُسْبَانَهُمْ, and their reckoning and their contemplation, كُلَّهَا بَاطِلٌ زَائِلٌ. All of this is false, and it is not without any substance whatsoever. The fifth lesson, he said, I saw some people blaming others and some slandering others. أَنِّي رَأَيْتُ النَّاسَ يَذُمُّ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا. That they would blame each other. وَيَغْتَابُ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا. And they would backbite against each other. They would defame each other. فَوَجَدْتُ ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْحَسَدِ. And I found that all of this was because of their jealousy for each other. فِي الْمَالِ وَالْجَاهِ وَالْعِلْمِ. In money, fame and knowledge. They were jealous of each other because of these things, and that caused them to do what? To blame each other and to slander each other. فَتَأَمَّلْتُ فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى. And then he said, I meditated on his saying, نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ مَعِيشَتَهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. That Allah Ta'ala said in the Qur'an that we are the ones who distributed their rizq in this dunya. نحن قسمنا بينهم معيشتهم في الحياة الدنيا. He said, فَعَلِمْتُ أَنَّ الْقِسْمَةَ كَانَتْ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And then I realized, I knew. Alimtu means I had certain knowledge. As I said before, ilm means to know something. Not to consider or suppose, but to know it to be the truth. فَعَلِمْتُ أَنَّ الْقِسْمَةَ, that the distribution, كَانَتْ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. All of this is from Allah Ta'ala. فِي الْأَزَلِ. فِي الْأَزَلِ means from before, from the beginning. All of this had been ordained by Allah Ta'ala from before time. Fil azal. فَمَا حَسَدْتُ أَحَدًا. And so I ceased to be jealous of anyone. وَرَضِيتُ بِقِسْمَةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And I became pleased and satisfied with the distribution of Allah Ta'ala. Can you see how the Qur'an, when it is applied, is a solution to the illnesses and the diseases of the heart, which lead to the sins of the tongue, the eyes, and the limbs. Tackle the problem at root source. If you cure the heart, then you cure the body. Because the king is here. The seat, the sovereignty of the human kingdom, Ibn Arabi rahmatullah alayhi talks about this. He said the king is the heart. If you control the heart, The Prophet ﷺ said this in one hadith, that he said that if this morsel of flesh, the heart, is sound, then everything is sound. Cure the heart. And the answer, the cure for all of this is in the Qur'an, if we apply the verses of the Qur'an. He said, the sixth useful lesson is that I saw some people acting with hostility towards others due to some motive and cause. So he saw that people were enemies of other people for whatever reason. فَتَأَمَّلْتُ فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, and I contemplated on the speech of Allah Ta'ala, the exalted, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا, that the Satan is your sworn enemy, so take him as your enemy. Then he says, فَعَلِمْتُ أَنَّهُ لَا تَجُوزُ عَدَاوَةُ أَحَدٍ غَيْرِ الشَّيْطَانِ, and then I realized that it is not permitted to be an enemy of anyone except the shaitan. He realized that to make enemies of people is not what Allah Ta'ala intended for us. He wanted us to live in harmony and take shaitan as your enemy. And I understood that enmity towards anyone but Satan was not allowed. The seventh useful lesson is that I saw everyone striving in earnest and working intensely in quest of their food and livelihood, to the point that they thereby fell into what was dubious and banned, degrading themselves and lowering their worth. Meaning people strived for their rizq so much that they even reached the edge of the halal and haram. The boundary where things became dubious, where they were not even sure if something was halal anymore, because they were so desperate to get to their rizq. So I meditated on his saying, فَأَمَّلْتُ فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. There is not a creature upon the earth other than it is the responsibility of Allah Ta'ala to provide for it. That the rizq of every creature on the earth, their rizq is the responsibility of Allah Ta'ala. إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. فَعَلِمْتُ أَنَّ رِزْقِي عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَقَدْ ضَمِنَ. And I realized that my provision depended on Allah Ta'ala, and He has guaranteed it. And so, فَاشْتَغَلْتُ بِعِبَادَتِهِ, and so I occupied myself with worshipping Him, and severed my hope from other than Him. وَقَطَعْتُ تَمَعِي عَمَّنْ سِوَاهُ, and I cut off all hope from anyone other than Allah Ta'ala. He said the final thing, the last lesson, is I saw everyone relying on something created. Some on the dinar and some on the dirham. These are the coins of the time. Some on wealth and property. Some on their business and trade, and others on some similar created thing. So he said that people begin to rely upon the medium rather than the source. They look at the last thing in the chain and they think this is the thing I'm reliant on, rather than understanding that the source is the true reliance, the one that should be relied upon. فتأملت في قوله تعالى ومن يتوكل على الله فهو حسبه إن الله بالغ أمره قد جعل الله لكل شيء قدرا. And so I reflected upon his saying, all of these are verses from the Qur'an. وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever relies upon Allah, He will be sufficient for him. إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَالِغُ أَمْرِهِ. Allah Ta'ala will bring about His command.
Just for them to make the space for the others.
Okay. Brothers, because it's holidays today, there will be plenty of people coming, inshallah. So please, can you sit as you sit in the prayer on your knees, and fill up all the gaps, and then just move forward, fill up all the gaps, please. Jazakumullahu khair.
Thank you.
If you do it first time, we won't have to tell you again and again, inshallah. All right? Thank you. Make space for me. Inna Allah baligh amrih. Allah Ta'ala will bring about His command. قَدْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدْرًا. Allah Ta'ala has prescribed a portion for all things. فَتَوَكَّلْتُ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبِي وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. And so I relied upon Allah Ta'ala, and He is sufficient for me. فَهُوَ حَسْبِي وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. And He is the best source of reliance. Shaqiq said, the teacher says to his student after this, he said, وَفَّقَكَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. May Allah Ta'ala grant you success. إِنِّي قَدْ نَظَرْتُ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالزَّبُورَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ وَالْفُرْقَانَ. I have examined, this is a scholar, he says I have examined, meaning he has studied the 4 books. He said the Torah, The Psalms, meaning the Zabur, the one that came to Dawood alayhi salam, Al-Injil, the Gospel, and the Furqan, meaning the Qur'an. إني قد نظرت التوراة والزبور والإنجيل والفرقان فوجدت الكتب الأربعة. And I found that the four books, these four books, تدور على هذه الفوائد الثمانية. They all revolve around these 8 benefits. That the distillation of these 4 scriptures is found in these 8 lessons. فمن عمل بها كان عاملا بهذه الكتب الأربعة. So whoever acts in accordance with these 8 pieces of advice, he would have acted in accordance with these 4 scriptures. So Imam Al-Ghazali rahmatullah, as I said in this work, he tries to distill his teachings into their essential elements so that they are concise, enough for people to keep in their minds as they go about their business and put them into practice. It's not meant to be an academic work. It's not meant to be something complex which needs to be studied in the quiet moments for a long period of time. It's meant to be something that strikes at the heart and which can be carried in your mind, real truths, everyday truths, so that when you are about to open your mouth to backbite someone or to listen to someone backbiting, you remember this and realize that this is something against the teachings of the scripture. Or when you feel yourself drawn towards the haram, then at that point you think to yourself that my rizq is coming from Allah Ta'ala, I don't need to go beyond His limits to obtain my rizq. So it's in the moment, at the time, that's when these pieces of advice can be put into practice. As usual, inshallah this will be recorded and put on the YouTube channel at Imam Shafiuddin. If you want to listen in more detail, you can go and listen on the YouTube channel. Or you can also look online. This book, Ayyuhal Walad, if you search this, it's freely available online. You can read the text and you can also search on this and find the distillation of this book online as well, inshallah. May it benefit you, and inshallah it's full of nuggets like this. Many more beautiful gems like this. At home, on the mantelpiece, we have a hadith at the moment which we rotate every so often. The hadith, it says that if the Son of Man were to run from his provision, the way he runs from death, it would still find him the way death will find him. Even your rizq, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. We read that verse from the Qur'an. That the provision of the servant is incumbent upon Allah Ta'ala to provide it. So in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if the son of Adam were to run from his rizq the way he runs from death, he says the rizq will find him even as death will find him. So what is destined for you, be it your rizq or your death, it will find you. So we don't need to go so far as to transgressing against the rights of people or overstepping the boundaries of Allah Ta'ala to obtain our rizq or to try to live longer. Whatever is to come to us will come, inshallah. Stay within these hudud where we treat people with respect and we observe the boundaries which Allah Ta'ala has prescribed for us. Ameen, summa ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah.